Welcome back to the channel. Here you'll find the fastest updates on breaking news, shocking secrets, and dramatic predictions for times. The young and the restless. Who will betray whom? What secrets are about to be revealed? And what horrific tragedy awaits the characters in Genoa City? Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us to discover the unmissable developments right now.
Welcome back to our channel for another deep dive into the compelling drama of Genoa City. Today is a beautiful day to unpack the latest twists on The Young and the Restless, where family legacies and personal demons collide in spectacular fashion. Let us delve straight into the unfolding tragedy surrounding one of our most beloved characters. The narrative of Nicholas Newman has always been defined by his unwavering sense of responsibility. A man perpetually positioned as the moral anchor and the ultimate problem solver within the notoriously chaotic Newman dynasty. For decades, Nick has willingly shouldered the immense burden of being the family fixer, stepping into the line of fire to shield his loved ones from the catastrophic fallout of their own destructive choices. However, this relentless expectation to remain the unbreakable pillar of strength has exacted a devastating psychological toll. The crushing weight of constantly absorbing the trauma of those around him without ever being permitted to shatter himself finally pushed him beyond the limits of human endurance, driving him into the dark, unforgiving embrace of severe substance abuse. The realization of his spiraling addiction culminated in a profoundly heartbreaking confession to Sharon Rosales, a woman who has historically served as his deepest confidant and emotional sanctuary. In a moment of sheer vulnerability, Nick stripped away the facade of the resilient golden boy, admitting that he was drowning in the very chaos he had spent his life trying to control. He articulated the suffocating pressure of his existence, confessing that the endless cycle of saving his family had left him completely hollowed out and desperate for an escape. Sharon, demonstrating her characteristic empathy and strength, provided the unwavering support he desperately required in that critical moment. This devastating admission also sent shockwaves through the life of their son, Noah Newman, who was forced to confront the agonizing reality of his father's profound human fragility, forever altering the dynamic between the fiercely protective father and his deeply sorrowful son. Acknowledging the absolute severity of his crisis, Nick made the courageous decision to step away from the toxic battlegrounds of Genoa City and enter a specialized rehabilitation facility. This move was initially perceived as a beacon of hope by his terrified family, a necessary retreat where he could finally prioritize his own mental and physical survival. However, the stark reality of the rehabilitation process proved to be an entirely different and far more agonizing ordeal than Nick had ever anticipated. Stripped of his usual coping mechanisms and the constant, adrenaline-fueled distractions of managing his family's endless emergencies, Nick was forced to sit in the deafening silence of his own mind. The clinical environment, with its strict schedules and relentless therapeutic probing, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a psychological prison, amplifying his feelings of isolation and exacerbating his desperate craving for an immediate release from the overwhelming pressure of sobriety. Unable to withstand the crushing intensity of the recovery process, the upcoming narrative reveals a shocking and devastating turn of events as Nick Newman abruptly abandons the rehabilitation center far earlier than anyone expected. This desperate escape was not a calculated decision, but rather a frantic, impulsive flight driven by the overwhelming terror of facing his unmedicated reality. Breaking free from the facility, Nick plunges himself back into a world of profound danger, his hard-fought sobriety immediately hanging by the most fragile of threads. The decision to flee represents a catastrophic regression, a moment where the overwhelming desire to numb the pain completely eclipses his rational understanding of the fatal consequences that await him. By walking out those doors, Nick effectively severs his lifeline to professional help, choosing the unpredictable, treacherous path of active addiction over the agonizing, disciplined journey of genuine healing. Upon his escape, the most logical assumption would be a return to the familiar confines of Genoa City. But the intense shame and profound sense of failure dictate an entirely different course of action. Nick knows with absolute certainty that returning home would mean facing the deeply disappointed gaze of Sharon, the heartbroken sorrow of Noah, and the overbearing judgment of Victor Newman. The prospect of standing before his family as a broken, defeated man, having abandoned the very treatment they prayed would save him, is a humiliation he simply cannot endure. Furthermore, Genoa City is the epicenter of the very trauma that drove him to substance abuse in the first place. To return would be to willingly step back into the suffocating role of the family fixer, a role he is currently entirely incapable of fulfilling. Therefore, he chooses to vanish into the shadows, seeking refuge far away from the judgmental eyes of his legacy. Instead of heading toward the safety of his family, Nick's desperate flight leads him directly into the orbit of Marie Kirkland, a woman who represents a profound and immediate danger to his existence. Marie is a fellow patient he encountered during his brief tenure at the rehabilitation center, a woman battling her own severe and deeply ingrained addictions. During their time in the facility, they forged a quiet, intense connection, drawn together by the mutual recognition of a shared, unspeakable pain. When Nick breaks out at the center, he does not seek isolation. Rather, he actively seeks out Marie, viewing her as the sole beacon of understanding in a world that he feels has completely alienated him. She becomes his chosen destination, a sanctuary built not on the foundation of healing, but on the dangerous commonality of their mutual destruction. The psychological draw that tethers Nick to Marie is rooted in a deeply flawed but powerful illusion of absolute comprehension. Nick firmly believes that Marie is the only person on Earth who truly understands the specific, agonizing nature of his internal struggle. Unlike his family, who view his addiction as a tragic anomaly that must be swiftly cured so he can return to his duties, Marie accepts his brokenness without condition or expectation. With her, Nick does not have to pretend to be strong. He does not have to be the moral compass or the invincible protector. She demands nothing of him other than his presence, providing a twisted form of validation that normalizes his desire to surrender to the addiction. This profound sense of being seen and accepted at his absolute lowest point creates an incredibly potent, magnetic pull that overrides all of his logical survival instincts. The reunion between Nick and Marie rapidly devolves into a highly dangerous, intensely codependent relationship that actively accelerates their mutual downward spiral. Rather than serving as a support system to encourage sobriety, they become the ultimate enablers for one another, creating an isolated, hermetically sealed world where their addiction is not only tolerated but romanticized. The potential for a romantic entanglement adds a layer of intense emotional complexity to their bond, blurring the lines between genuine affection and the desperate clinging of two drowning souls. Together, they construct a shared delusion where they are protecting each other from the harsh, demanding realities of the outside world, specifically avoiding any contact with their respective families. This toxic synergy ensures that any fleeting thoughts of returning to recovery are swiftly extinguished by the comforting, numbing presence of the other. Back in Genoa City, the devastating revelation of Nick's escape from the rehabilitation center strikes the Newman family with the force of a catastrophic earthquake. The initial confusion rapidly gives way to sheer, unadulterated panic as the facility confirms that the golden boy has vanished without a trace. Victor Newman, operating with his characteristic blend of fierce protection and cold calculation, immediately mobilizes the vast, limitless resources of his corporate empire to track down his missing son. The emotional fallout is profound, particularly for Sharon and Noah, who are plunged into a waking nightmare, utterly terrified of what a desperate, anchored Nick might do out in the unforgiving world. The realization that he is actively fleeing from the help he so desperately needs shatters the fragile hope they had been clinging to, replacing it with a grim, suffocating dread regarding his ultimate fate. The pursuit of Nick Newman becomes an obsessive, high-stakes mission for the entire family, requiring a meticulous and frantic investigation to uncover his hidden whereabouts. The investigation quickly reveals that Nick is not alone, unearthing the existence of Marie Kirkland and the terrifying reality of their shared escape. The discovery of this dangerous new variable dramatically elevates the urgency of the search, as the Newmans realize that Nick is not just wandering aimlessly, but has actively tethered himself to another severe addict. They understand that every passing hour deepens the toxic bond between Nick and Marie, making the prospect of pulling him back from the brink exponentially more difficult and dangerous. The family is forced to confront the horrifying possibility that they are no longer just fighting against a chemical dependency, but against a powerful, codependent relationship that actively shields Nick from reality. After days of agonizing uncertainty and relentless searching, the Newman family finally manages to pinpoint the remote, isolated location where Nick and Marie have sought refuge. The impending arrival of his family sets the stage for a monumental and emotionally explosive confrontation. The Newmans are forced to mentally and emotionally prepare themselves to face a version of Nick that they may barely recognize, a man stripped of his usual dignity, fiercely defensive of his new life, and deeply entrenched in the throes of active addiction. The impending clash is not merely a physical retrieval, but a brutal psychological war between the powerful legacy of the Genoa City dynasty and the grim, unyielding reality of substance abuse. The family approaches the hideout knowing that simply finding him is only the beginning of a much darker and more complicated battle. As the Newman family breaches the perimeter of their hidden sanctuary, they are immediately met with the fierce, unwavering defiance of Marie Kirkland. Marie is completely unwilling to let Nick go, viewing the arrival of his family not as a rescue mission, but as a hostile invasion by the very people who destroyed the man she has come to care for. Marie fiercely argues that returning to the suffocating expectations of the Newman Empire will be a death sentence for Nick, asserting that only she can provide the unconditional acceptance he needs to survive. Her refusal to back down creates a highly volatile standoff, severely complicating the family's desperate attempts to reach the rational part of Nick's mind and pull him away from the precipice. She positions herself as his ultimate protector, challenging the very foundation of the Newman family's authority and their understanding of what Nick truly needs to heal. Marie's steadfast presence and aggressive protection of their codependent bond severely complicates the already agonizing process of Nick's potential recovery. The Newman family finds themselves locked in a devastating emotional tug-of-war, desperately trying to pull Nick back into the light while Marie continuously anchors him to the comforting darkness of their shared addiction. Nick is caught squarely in the crossfire of this psychological warfare, paralyzed by the agonizing choice between the family that loves him but demands his strength, and the woman who asks for nothing but his brokenness. The tension reaches an unbearable crescendo as Victor Newman steps forward, delivering a final, uncompromising ultimatum that demands his son choose between his bloodline and his demise. Nick stands at the precipice of his own existence, his eyes darting frantically between the desperate faces of his family and the fiercely protective presence of Marie. As Sharon steps closer, whispering a heartbreaking plea, Nick's expression suddenly shifts to a chilling, unreadable resolve. He slowly reaches out his hand, leaving the entire Newman family paralyzed in a moment of sheer suspense, terrified that the golden boy has just made a decision from which he can never, ever return.